Tonight on Huckabee, denying military death benefits.
Putting military families, war widows, in the crosshairs of a political shutdown. Someone should be fired.
National Park Rangers using scare tactics to deny paying customers access.
You could feel the element of fear.
As Washington plays political games, real Americans are left to deal with the real consequences. And his health insurance went up to $10,000. She says Obamacare has raped her future. Real Americans on how the Affordable Care Act is making life unaffordable. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Mike Huckabee.
Thank you so much. We have a great audience here and a great show. Welcome to Huckabee from the Fox News studios in New York City. All right, the politics of Washington is great theater, but the script being played out, well, it's a tragedy. It's a story of egos, money, power, and pride.
On the last episode of As the Hill Turns, they were worlds apart.
You do not hold people hostage or engage in ransom taking to get 100% of your way.
I was disappointed that the president refuses to negotiate.
While America suffers.
Nancy, did you visit the Vet Memorial today?
Not yet.
Are you going?
I go all the time.
Washington plays the blame game.
If Congress fails to meet its responsibility, it could deeply damage financial markets.
Republican forced default on the nation's debt would be magnitudes worse than the damage they've already caused to our great country.
Will the president work with the speaker? Can the speaker work with Harry? Will the shutdown ever end? Tune in next week for the next episode of As the Hill Turns.
I mean, isn't it like a soap opera? And while the actors on the stage of Washington consider their importance, across the great land of these United States are the stories of people who don't have the luxury of enjoying politics as a blood sport for spectators. They're the ones whose lives are impacted away from the cameras and lights. They're the ones who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of the policies of the politicians, but who are often crushed by them. I often say that the practitioners of politics tend to see things horizontally. Left and right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. But most Americans, they view life vertically. Up and down, better or worse. They care far less about the horizontal leanings of their elected officials as they do about the vertical direction of their own lives. Their concerns are more pragmatic, like, will my child's school provide a quality education? Will the trash get picked up on time? Will our streets be safe? Will the potholes get fixed? Far too much of the political ruling class is focused on advancing horizontal purity. That matters little to someone without a job, or someone who has a family member with Alzheimer's, or somebody who missed last month's mortgage payment. Now, if elected officials want to truly serve, let them first understand it is not about them. I learned early on in my political career, as kind of a rare Republican in a state dominated by 90% elected Democrats, that people cared most that I governed according to what was best for them, not just the party. And I learned that good policy is good politics. When the policies of the officials truly lift people up, the party they belong to gets carried along in the updraft. I long for a time when people from all over the horizontal spectrum will care more about the vertical spectrum. It would be refreshing if the criteria for determining a good public servant is not how conservative or liberal he or she might pretend to be, but rather how effective he or she is in solving problems and serving the people who aren't even big money contributors, but who are getting kicked in the teeth by the hardships of life, and they don't need government putting a boot in their backside. I don't think it's the job of government to be our collective nanny, but neither should it be a bully. People shouldn't go to Washington for a career. They ought to go as a brief respite to serve. Term limits would ensure that they governed for a while, and then they went home. And they saw how those laws that they passed actually worked. By the way, there should be no congressional perks or pensions other than Social Security and an option to contribute to a 401k plan. A person holding office shouldn't be allowed to seek another office other than the one that he or she holds unless one is willing to resign so as not to use the taxpayers' money to campaign for another job. And then require full disclosure of all political contributions. Stop the cowardly anonymous giving that allows very wealthy donors to determine elections without ever being held accountable for their contributions. Oh, and here's one. Any ad that mentions a candidate by name ought to be subject to libel and slander laws if proven to be misleading or false. That would be a game changer. But, well, we don't need to just change the game. Folks, we need to change the country. And we need to do it now. Well, tonight's show is going to be a little different. You're not going to hear from any politicians, pundits, or strategists, columnists, none. Because what's happening in Washington has some serious consequences for a lot of Americans. And we're going to talk to a few of them. How have the actions of our lawmakers affected their lives, their families, and their future? My first guest says that the government betrayed the families of American fallen heroes. Even as the president signed a bill to provide death benefits to military families on Thursday, the outrage over the suspended payments for the first 10 days of the shutdown remains. And there's an increasing chorus of calls for Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel to step down. Jane Horton's husband, Army sniper Christopher Horton, was killed in action in Afghanistan in September of 2011. As a war widow, she knows firsthand not only how important the immediate death benefits are to the families of the fallen, but that all who die defending our freedom are able to be given the dignified transfer they deserve. And Jane Horton joins me now. Jane, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to see you again, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Governor, for having me.
First of all, Jane, tell us what happens when you get that knock on the door and they tell you that your husband has been killed in action.
When I got the knock at the door by the two uniformed military officers, they immediately sat me down and told me that I would get death gratuity to pay for all the immediate expenses of my husband's funeral. This money was used to pay my mortgage, to pay my car payment, to put food on the table, and also my family flew in the next day from Ohio, and that money came to cover that as well as the month and a half that it took to bury my husband and the several dignified transfers that followed.
I know that that's an important part of the process of recovering from the death of a spouse. But my guess is that's money you wish you never had to receive because it represented the death of your husband and a change of your life that meant things would never be the same.
It was very horrifying to get. It made me sick to my stomach, and it took me a very long time to accept that money. But it was something that was essential for me to give my husband the very best I could give him. He gave his life for me, and it was the biggest honor and responsibility of my life to give him the best funeral that I could give, fitting of a valiant warrior.
Jane, 29 soldiers have been killed in action since the partial government shutdown. Mm-hmm. These families, when they got the knock on the door, they didn't get the assurance that they would receive that same benefit that you received. How did you feel for them when you found out that these military benefits for the families of those killed in action weren't going to be paid right away?
Governor, I was sickened, I felt betrayed, I was hurt, and to be honest, it wasn't even about the money. It was that our country went there. They crossed a line that you don't cross. They inflicted pain upon one of our most vulnerable and sacred populations in America. And honestly, they disrespected the warriors that gave their life for our nation.
You know, when I hear the stories of these families, I just wonder, do you think that this happened on purpose? Could this have been avoided?
I do not think it happened on purpose. I have some pretty good sources on that. I've talked to a lot of people to try to figure out what went wrong. But I honestly think that our nation is in such disarray right now, and so many people are bickering that they forgot forgot us. They forgot one of America's most vulnerable populations, and it's just something that is absolutely unacceptable and should never, ever, ever happen. And when our country's priorities are so messed up that we overlook a population of those that have given up everything for our freedom, I think we really need to look at ourselves and look at our priorities as a country.
Well, Jane, I thank you very much for being here. You know, I'm so sorry for what you and your family have had to go through, and I'm embarrassed that other families had to go through it without even getting those benefits until finally, after 10 days, Congress woke up and decided they would get this fixed and the president would take care of it. But it should never have happened, and we thank you and for your continued service to the other families, because I know you've been out there traveling and meeting them, and God bless you, Jane, for doing that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Well, coming up later in the show, we have country music stars Lori Morgan and Pam Tillis. But first, remember when the president said this?
If you like your private health insurance plan, you can keep your plan. Period.
Well, period. Maybe not, exclamation mark. Coming up is a man who just signed up for Obamacare, and he says that promise from the president is not being kept. You'll meet him next.
I'd like to hear from you. Go to my website, MikeHuckabee.com. Tell me what you think on the Leave Feedback section, or sign up for my Facebook page and follow me on Twitter. You can find a link to that and more at MikeHuckabee.com.